He walked into the interview room, confident, prepared, and proud of his achievements. Years of hard work, degrees, and accolades behind him, but soon, all of that would feel invisible. The interviewer looked him over and said, almost casually, "We don't think you fit our company culture." A polite smile, a handshake, the door closing behind him. They had no idea who he really was. Just another candidate in their eyes. But what they didn't know would soon turn everything upside down. Today, we uncover a story of shocking injustice, hidden bias, and a revelation that no one saw coming. Before we dive in, hit that like button and subscribe so more stories like this reach people who need to hear them. He wasn't just any candidate. In fact, he wasn't a candidate at all, at least not in the way anyone would expect. He was the CEO of the very company he was walking into. Yet here he was, dressed in a simple suit, blending in, pretending to be just another job seeker. Why? Rumors had reached him. Stories about biased decisions, dismissals hidden behind the vague excuse of culture fit. He wanted to see for himself. Born in a small town, he had fought every obstacle life threw at him: limited resources, skepticism from others, and systemic barriers that often make people of color doubt their own potential. He had risen through hard work and determination, eventually leading the company to new heights. And yet, even as CEO, he knew that bias could live quietly in corporate hallways, unnoticed by those in power. Walking into the prestigious office, he felt the familiar hum of the building, the sleek designs, polished floors, the quiet murmur of employees. To the outside world, this was the dream workplace. To him, it was a test, a chance to uncover whether the company he had built still reflected his values. As he greeted the interviewer with calm professionalism, subtle signals of bias began to appear. The lingering glances, the polite but distant smiles, the questions that seemed to measure something beyond skills and experience. He answered every question thoughtfully, highlighting leadership and achievements. On paper or so, the interviewer thought he fit every requirement. But what they didn't know would soon make this encounter unforgettable. Behind the polite conversation and rehearsed questions, invisible walls of prejudice were closing in. And in a few moments, the truth of who he really was would turn this ordinary interview into a shocking revelation that no one would see coming. The interview began smoothly, or so it seemed. He answered every question with poise, sharing his experience, vision, and the strategies he had implemented in previous roles. The interviewer nodded politely, occasionally scribbling notes, but there was a subtle shift in their tone. Questions became oddly personal, focusing less on qualifications and more on personality, cultural fit, and team dynamics. He could feel the invisible walls closing in. Every answer he gave was met with a polite smile, but the warmth was absent. There were pauses, slight glances exchanged, and comments that seemed neutral on the surface, but carried a quiet weight of judgment. It was the kind of subtle bias that doesn't appear on paper, but speaks loudly in the room. He pressed on, highlighting his leadership style, teamwork, and achievements. He spoke about innovation, employee engagement, and long-term growth. He explained strategies that had doubled revenue and improved employee satisfaction in previous roles. But the interviewer's focus seemed elsewhere, almost avoiding the content of his answers. As the conversation continued, small remarks began to surface: questions about his accent, subtle assumptions about where he had grown up, comments about whether he would blend in with the existing team. Each remark felt like a calculated test, designed not to measure skill, but to confirm a preconceived narrative. He forced a smile, masking the frustration rising inside him. How could someone with his track record be reduced to a series of assumptions? How could a company he had built or would soon lead judge potential based on invisible labels rather than merit? Minutes stretched into an eternity. He noticed the tension building in the room, the polite but firm attempt to close the meeting without outright rejection. And then it came. "We don't think you fit our company culture." The words landed like a blow, but not for the reason they intended. On the surface, it was a simple rejection. But beneath it, a deeper injustice simmered, an exposure of the subtle, systemic bias that continues to shape workplaces even today. They didn't know his identity, his achievements, or the irony of their judgment. They saw only what they assumed, allowing prejudice to dictate their decision. Then he paused. The room, still polished and professional, seemed to hold its breath. The polite smiles and confident nods of the interviewers suddenly felt fragile, like thin glass about to shatter. He looked them in the eye, calm, measured, and then spoke the words that would stop them in their tracks. "I'm the CEO of this company." For a moment, silence. The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. The interviewers blinked, confusion and disbelief flashing across their faces. They looked around, hoping someone was joking. But no one was. He was standing there, not as a candidate, but as the very person whose name graced the letterhead, whose decisions shaped the company they had been interviewing for. Their polite demeanor faltered. The casual authority they had wielded over the candidate vanished instantly. Every assumption, every bias, every judgment they had quietly made now stood exposed. They had seen only a suit, a person of color, someone they thought they could evaluate without consequence. They hadn't seen the truth. He let the moment linger, allowing them to feel the weight of their prejudice. Then he continued, his tone steady yet pointed. "This is exactly what I came here to witness. I wanted to see what you value, who you consider a fit, and who you dismiss without realizing the harm you do. Today, you rejected someone based on assumptions, not ability. And that, right there, is the problem we need to fix." The room was still. No words came. Faces turned pale as they realized the depth of their misjudgment. Every subtle remark, every whispered thought about fit, now revealed itself for what it truly was: bias masquerading as objectivity. And in that moment, the irony was undeniable. A man they had dismissed so casually, a man they assumed lacked the credentials, had the ultimate authority. The rejection, intended to close a door, instead opened a mirror. And what it reflected wasn't him, it was them, their assumptions, and the systemic injustice hiding quietly in everyday decisions. The aftermath of that moment lingered long after the interview ended. The interviewers sat in stunned silence, confronting a truth they hadn't expected. Their judgments, casual and unexamined, had just been exposed. They had dismissed talent not because of lack of skill, but because of assumptions, biases, and invisible barriers that continue to shape workplaces everywhere. For him, the exercise wasn't about embarrassment or revenge. It was about shining a light on the subtle, systemic injustice that allows qualified individuals to be overlooked or rejected simply for not fitting in. But there were real consequences this time. The HR personnel responsible for the biased decision were held accountable. They were removed from their positions, a clear signal that prejudice and discrimination have no place, especially in a company striving for fairness. This story is more than one interview. It reflects a broader reality, how assumptions influence decisions in hiring, promotion, and recognition. Every time we let bias dictate our judgments, we risk losing brilliance, innovation, and fairness. And every individual dismissed unjustly carries the weight of that missed opportunity, often silently, unseen, unheard. The lesson is clear. Challenge assumptions, examine culture, and value people for their abilities, not labels. True leadership doesn't just build companies. It ensures they are fair, inclusive, and just. Sometimes, the most powerful lessons come when the person we least expect holds a mirror up to our own prejudices. So the next time someone says you don't fit, ask yourself, whose judgment is that? And whose culture are we really protecting? And remember, accountability matters. Actions have consequences, even for those who think no one is watching. If you've experienced or witnessed injustice, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video so together we can spread the message further.